Excelentísimo señor
His Excellency Gilbert Humbo, President of IFAD,
Excelentísima señora
Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina,
Ministra de la República
Prime Minister
Popular
of the
de
People's Republic of Bangladesh,
Señor Presidente del Consejo de Gobernadores,
Chairperson of the Governing Council,
Señores Gobernadores,
Governors,
Señores Delegados,
distinguished delegates,
Señoras y Señores.
ladies and
En
gentlemen.
primer lugar, déjenme
Firstly,
decirles
please allow me to tell you that
que escuchar el discurso
I was greatly touched
de la ministra de la
by the speech of the Prime Minister of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, not only due to her achievements, but also her dreams and wishes for her country.
Es para mí un honor representar a
It is an honor for me to represent the President of Peru, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski,
dirigirme a ustedes
and to address you
la 41ª
during the 41st session of the Governing Council of IFAD.
Quiero aprovechar esta
I would like to
oportunidad
take this opportunity
para felicitar
to congratulate,
al presidente Kuczynski
on behalf of
mío propio
the country's President, Mr. Kuczynski, and myself, the President of IFAD,
de esta organización
for his first year
el respaldo que nuestro
at the head of this organization, and also to reiterate our support
el tema principal
for the
de este
President.
Consejo de Gobernadores lleva como
The
título
main theme for this Governing Council
a la
is
resiliencia,
From Fragility to Long-Term Resilience,
invertir en
Investing in Sustainable Rural Economies.
como reconoce la agenda
As set out in the 2030 Agenda,
es un elemento
fragility is a major factor and one of the greatest challenges
dados por la
faced by the international community in seeking to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
son múltiples los factores
Many
que nos llevan a la
factors
fragilidad
lead to fragility
y que están
and
de alguna manera socavando
are, in one way or another, undermining our opportunities for development and growth.
los fenómenos meteorológicos
Weather
y el cambio climático.
phenomena and climate change are some of the main factors. Recently, several regions in the world have suffered the devastating effects of the El Niño phenomenon. These were unexpected effects, and many of us were not prepared for these effects. Just to give you an example,
La presencia del
in Peru, the presence of coastal El Niño,
calentamiento de las aguas del mar
the warming of the seawater over the years spanning 2016 and 2017, generated a loss of some 100,000 hectares
actualmente
of crops.
de la prevención,
We are currently working in the field of prevention.
pero no es solamente el cambio climático,
However,
también tenemos otros elementos.
there are other challenges in addition to climate change.
La mayor
For instance,
incidencia de conflictos
the greater incidence of violent conflict,
han sido ocasionados por
many of which
y que
were
distraen
caused
la ayuda al desarrollo
by men,
por tener que concentrarse
and which
en la asistencia
take development aid away
incremento en
from what it is meant for and toward humanitarian assistance. The increase in the number of refugees and displaced persons, the slow recovery of the global economy, social and political instability which affects many countries, the lack of infrastructure and cutting-edge technology, as well as relatively weak or lacking institutional capacity through which to tackle one, many, or all of these factors. This lack of organization
de forma
often
exponencial
exponentially
que se incrementen los
negatively
problemas en forma
affects
exponencial en muchas de
these
nuestras
countries and societies.
sociedades.
According to the OECD,
2%
22%,
parte de la población
just over one-fifth of the global population, lives in fragile situations.
que de los 400
It is estimated that
de pobres extremos
the 480 million people living in extreme poverty in the world in 2015
se llegue a incrementar
will rise to 542 million people in 2035. The fragility of this population intensifies poverty and undermines opportunities for individuals and societies to escape poverty. At the same time, poverty engenders greater fragility. This relationship between fragility and extreme poverty is even more deeply entrenched within rural populations, which suffer the effects of climate change increasingly, in addition to problems such as conflicts over land ownership, prices, social tension, the lack of opportunities for young people, and gender inequality, as well as the lack of access to credit, education, basic services, and infrastructure. All of these elements underlie poverty, and IFAD is trying to help us overcome these situations. In these rural populations, agriculture is the main source of income. Often, agriculture provides livelihoods for the population. About 30% of the elderly population in Peru lives off agriculture. According to the OECD, the contribution of agriculture to the GDP of countries, of most fragile countries, is 2 or 3 times greater than in other contexts. That is why agriculture is a key sector in eradicating hunger and poverty. Inclusive rural transformation within the agriculture sector is one of the keys to tackling the underlying causes of vulnerability and fragility, and is, of course, also a major opportunity to do away with these pockets of poverty of the population, leading to better livelihoods and standards of living. Peru is one of the 10 countries in the world with the greatest biodiversity. We have 83 different climates of all the different climates that exist in the world. It hosts some 70% of the planet's total biodiversity. The great variety of climates and soils in the Andes has led to the diversity of usable plant and animal resources in our country. We range from sea level to some 7,000 meters above sea level. Potatoes, tomatoes, chili peppers, and quinoa are but a few of the treasures that the Andes have given the world. If we add to these the fusion of languages and cultures in the country, we can safely claim that our country is one of the wealthiest in terms of biodiversity. Peru was the place where many migrants stopped. Our culture, our tourist potential are all incalculable. However, all of this wealth and these strengths also go hand in hand with high levels of ecosystem fragility and vulnerability to climate change, vulnerability to natural disasters, to historic social conflicts, and many others, which undermine our efforts to eradicate poverty and make it more difficult for us to achieve the SDGs. Indeed, Peru is one of the countries that is most vulnerable to climate change. By way of example, the effects of global warming on the Andean glaciers have led to the loss of some 40% of their surface area. This situation, of course, negatively affects a very valuable reserve of freshwater resources, which is essential to consumption production, energy production, and so on. Also, over 80% of our main crops are vulnerable to drought and frost. Faced with this problem, Peru's government has been driving programs for water renewal, such as the Sierra Azul program, whose main component is water sowing and harvesting in the Andes. There's also a program for technified irrigation, the Upper Andes livestock programs, and many others. We also have programs for the prevention, support, emergency rehabilitation, and reconstruction of our areas. for almost 2 decades, and this is the great thing about Peru, our economy has grown steadily by about 6% on a yearly basis. This has contributed to the reduction of poverty in a very considerable fashion. Poverty went from 54.3% in 2002 to 20.7% in 2016. Extreme poverty fell from 23.9% to 3.8% over the same period. Extreme poverty has all but disappeared in this period. However, when it comes to rural poverty, the rate for rural poverty, not that long ago, in 2016, reached 43.8%, and extreme rural poverty reached 13.2%. All the growth that Peru has seen has benefited urban areas more than rural areas. For every 3 poor people who are lifted out of poverty in urban areas, just 1 person is lifted out of poverty in rural areas. That is why that is the most difficult group within which to eradicate poverty. That is where IFAD helps Peru out. The rural population must not feel that the government has abandoned it. These people need to feel that they have hope, that they can dream, and that they have opportunities for their development and for better living conditions. The government of President Kuczynski aims to reduce poverty to 15% and extreme poverty to 1.5%. In order to do this, it is necessary for the international community to acknowledge that Peru and other middle-income countries deserve special treatment to overcome the serious problems that feed vulnerability, such as poverty and rural poverty and fragility, as I was saying. The strengthening of productive programs in rural areas, initiatives for the active involvement of young people, these are both key factors. We cannot allow many young people in these rural areas to feel hopeless due to the illegal economy, the gray economy, the trade of illegal goods. So we need to work more with women, especially. Those households where women have access to education lead to educated men too. So we also need to expand efforts to develop agriculture in rural areas. IFAD, which reaches areas that no one else reaches, has been active in Peru since 1980, 3 years after it was established, supporting projects for sustainable rural development. Over these decades, it has funded 10 interventions benefiting over 186,000 families, not just any families, rural families, almost 1 million people who have been lifted out of poverty thanks to this program, which the government also supports fervently. The Peru Country Program and Strategy Evaluation for IFAD was just concluded, covering the period from 2002 to 2016. This evaluation acknowledged that the projects conducted had a significant impact on poverty reduction and increasing assets, empowering women and rural youth, and in generating innovative, strategic, and replicable solutions, thus leading to public policy in favor of smallholder farmers. The economic and social innovations introduced by IFAD projects have been replicated by other projects in the country and in other countries alike. And many of these types of innovation have been converted to public policy, not just involving the central government, but also other governance levels, which Peru's government is involved in. There are many other policies that the government has been implementing to promote rural development. For instance, Peru has a model for executing hubs where there's a resource allocation committee which decides how to allocate resources provided by the government. This was replicated by the World Bank as well as many local governments in implementing productive and rural development projects. Also, the model for capitalizing on local capacity for rural extension have been turned into public policy. There are many competitions where institutions compete for resources based on their proposals and their projects. Peru views IFAD as a strategic partner, and that is what we hope for too. We would like IFAD to view Peru as a strategic partner, a strategic, efficient, and reliable partner in the fight against poverty and rural areas, not only thanks to our history working together in a coordinated fashion, but also due to the positive impact of IFAD's strategies and programs in the most vulnerable parts of the population. That is why yesterday Peru made a pledge toward IFAD's 11th replenishment. Our country truly welcomes the strengthening of IFAD's sub-regional offices, especially that office in Peru. The tangible results and the value of the contribution of IFAD's interventions in our country have been recognized by Peru's state in the National Roundtable with which the country program evaluation for IFAD ended, as well as through the ownership of projects through co-funding amounting to 50 to 60% of these projects. These bear out our support. For every dollar that IFAD provides, we co-fund projects to the tune of $1 as well. The latest project for the improvement of public services for sustainable development in the area of the Apurima and Montara rivers generates great expectations in the countries, especially, among others, given its effects on the fight against drug trafficking. This area of influence of the rivers I mentioned is a difficult, complicated area, and generally speaking, drug traffickers often work in this area. But we need to work in this area. We need to rescue many young people and provide them with well-being through a legal, healthy economy. And that is an area that IFAD is targeting. And we welcome IFAD's efforts and will also leverage resources in support of this program. We trust that the new program on national strategic opportunities, which we are beginning to develop with IFAD, will contribute significantly to building long-term resilience in vulnerable communities. We also trust it will help overcome rural poverty, an objective I've already mentioned, because this is where pockets of poverty often exist. We hope it will also create opportunities for development for young people and strengthen institutionality in order to promote lasting development. That is our greatest concern, that the population that those people who have been lifted out of poverty not fall back into poverty. We want irreversible change, irreversible development. Lastly, I believe I should reiterate just how important it is for IFAD to continue to support middle-income countries such as Peru. Although we have seen considerable economic growth, as I already mentioned, giving you some figures just a while ago, we still face inequality, great inequality, and pockets of rural poverty, which affect almost half of the population living in rural areas. They're highly dependent on traditional and subsistence farming. We'd like to reiterate the commitment of Peru's government, along with the international community's commitment to the achievement of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda, to leave no one behind. To leave no one behind so that development and growth may be inclusive for all communities, including the most remote communities in rural areas. Thank you very much, Mr. President.